Frank Harmon wiped the sweat from his forehead as he climbed over a pile of twisted metal. The ruins of the old military research facility stretched out before him, a playground of forgotten treasures for those brave enough to enter. The year was 2157, and the world was not what it once was. Resources were scarce, and people like Frank made their living finding what others had left behind. The sky above was a dirty orange, a reminder of the environmental disasters that had reshaped Earth. Frank adjusted his breathing mask and continued his search. He had been coming to this spot for 3 weeks now, and each day he found less and less of value. Today might be his last try before moving on to a new location. Just need one good find, he muttered to himself as he used his metal detector. The device was old but reliable, much like Frank himself. At 46, his dark hair was streaked with gray, and lines marked his face, but his eyes remained sharp. The detector suddenly beeped. Frank kneeled down and began to dig through the rubble. His gloved hands pushed aside concrete chunks until he saw something gleaming. It wasn't the dull shine of copper or the rusty hue of iron. This was different. Frank pulled out a piece of metal about the size of his palm. It was light, surprisingly light, and had an unusual blue-gray color. As he turned it over in his hands, he noticed faint lines etched across its surface, like a circuit board but more organic. "What are you?" he asked the object. The metal seemed to pulse for a moment, catching the dying sunlight in a way that made it glow slightly blue. Frank blinked, sure he had imagined it. He placed the strange metal in his bag and continued searching until sunset. That night, in his small apartment built from shipping containers stacked at the edge of what used to be Seattle, Frank examined his find under the light. The metal defied everything he knew about materials. It couldn't be scratched, even with his diamond-tipped tools. It was lighter than aluminum, but seemed stronger than steel. Most strange was how it felt warm to the touch, almost alive. Frank knew he needed help to understand what he had found. The next morning, he visited Elaine Porter at the community college where she taught basic physics. Elaine had once been a respected scientist at a major university before her theories about energy conversion were rejected. Now she taught simple classes in a building with leaky ceilings. "Frank, this is not just unusual," Elaine said after running some tests. Her gray hair was tied back in a messy bun, and excitement made her look younger than her 53 years. "This material doesn't match anything on our periodic table. The way it absorbs and redirects energy, it shouldn't be possible." Over the next few days, they discovered more strange properties. The metal responded to certain sound frequencies by glowing brighter. When exposed to electricity, it seemed to store the energy and release it in controlled bursts. "We need to keep this quiet," Elaine warned as they worked late in her small lab. "If this is what I think it is, it could change everything." Frank agreed, but he didn't fully understand the importance of their discovery yet. He was still thinking about how many credits he could get for the strange metal. He didn't realize that what he had found wasn't just another piece of scrap. It was the first piece of a puzzle that would eventually take humanity to the stars. As Elaine connected the metal to a battery, the fragment began to glow more intensely than ever before. Symbols appeared on its surface, projected into the air above it like a hologram. Neither of them could read the strange writing, but they both understood what it meant. Whatever this was, it wasn't from Earth. 6 months passed since Frank found the strange metal. He and Elaine worked every day to understand it better. They called it stellarite because of how it glowed like a tiny star when activated. Their small lab in the back of the community college was now filled with makeshift equipment they had built or traded for. Frank no longer thought about selling the stellarite. He had seen too much of what it could do. Just last week, they had managed to program the material to change its shape slightly by exposing it to different sound patterns. The possibilities seemed endless. "Look at this," Elaine said one evening. She held a small piece of stellarite above a metal plate, and to Frank's amazement, both objects floated in the air between her hands. "I've figured out how to make it generate an anti-gravity field." Frank whistled. That's going to change everything. Neither of them noticed the power meter outside the lab spinning faster than it ever had before. The energy surge was detected by the regional grid monitors, and flags were raised in government systems that still function despite the world's decline. 3 days later, a black car pulled up outside the college. A tall man in a neat gray suit stepped out. Unlike most people these days, his clothes were clean and new-looking. He walked directly to Elaine's classroom and waited for her lecture to finish. "Dr. Porter," the man said as students filed out, "I'm Agent Dominic Clark. I'd like to talk to you about your recent power usage." Elaine's face remained calm, but her heart raced. "I run experiments sometimes. Nothing interesting. Energy spikes like yours don't happen with nothing interesting," Clark said. His voice was friendly, but his eyes were cold. "The government is very curious about what you and Mr. Harmon are working on." Elaine tried to appear confused. "How do you know about Frank?" Clark smiled. "We know many things, Dr. Porter. Now, why don't we go to your lab?" She had no choice but to lead him there. Frank was working with the Stellarite when they arrived. He quickly covered it, but not fast enough. "What was that blue glow?" Clark asked sharply. "Just an LED project for the students," Frank said. Clark walked to the table and removed the cloth. The Stellarite piece sat there, now dim. Clark picked it up, turning it over in his hands. "This doesn't look like any material I've seen before." "It's nothing special," Elaine insisted. Clark set the Stellarite down and pulled out a small device. He waved it over the material. The device beeped rapidly, and Clark's expression changed from doubt to intense interest. "Dr. Porter, Mr. Harmon, I'm afraid I'll have to confiscate this material and all your research. This is now a matter of national security." "You can't just take our work," Frank said, stepping forward. "I can and I will," Clark replied. "The remains of our government are very interested in new power sources. This could help rebuild our nation. Or build new weapons," Elaine said quietly. Clark didn't deny it. "Wait outside while I call for transport." As soon as he stepped out to use his radio, Elaine moved quickly. "We have to leave now," she whispered. She grabbed their main research tablet and a bag she kept packed for emergencies. Frank carefully picked up the Stellarite. "Where will we go?" "I have friends," Elaine said. "People who work outside the system." They slipped out the back door just as more government vehicles arrived. That night, as they rode on an old electric train heading west, Frank looked at the small piece of Stellarite glowing softly in his hand. "We're fugitives now," he said. Elaine nodded. "But we're free. And so is the Stellarite." She looked out at the dark landscape passing by. "Something tells me this is just the beginning of a much bigger journey." Frank closed his fingers around the material that had changed his life. It pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat, as if agreeing with Elaine's words. Frank and Elaine arrived at an underground facility hidden beneath an old shopping mall. People moved quickly around them, carrying tools and computer parts. This place was alive with activity, unlike the dying world above. "Welcome to the nest," said a woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes. She wore faded blue overalls with many pockets full of tools. "I'm Olivia Wright. Elaine told me about you on the secure line." Frank shook her hand. "Nice setup you have here." "We're all former scientists, engineers, and dreamers," Olivia explained as she led them through the busy space. "The government thinks we're just scavengers. We prefer to keep it that way." Over the next few weeks, Frank and Elaine shared everything they knew about Stellarite with Olivia's team. With better equipment, they made new discoveries daily. "It's not just a material," said Kyle, a young engineer with quick hands and quicker thoughts. "It's billions of tiny machines working together." "Nanotechnology?" asked Frank. "Yes, but nothing like what we tried to build," Elaine said. "This is far more advanced, and I think it's alive in some way." One day, Olivia brought a device that sent out different radio frequencies. When they exposed the Stellarite to certain patterns, It glowed brighter and projected more symbols into the air. "It's responding," Olivia said excitedly, "like we're speaking its language." After months of work, they learned to communicate with the Stellarite. It contained broken pieces of information from an alien database. Most was damaged, but they found one complete set of instructions. "It's a blueprint," Elaine said, looking at the 3D model floating above the Stellarite. "For some kind of engine." Frank studied the design. "Not just any engine. This thing bends space. It could take us to the stars." The team worked day and night. They converted an old cargo ship into something new, adding the Stellarite engine to its core. They named the ship Phoenix because it rose from the ashes of their broken world. "Will it actually work?" Frank asked as they prepared for the first test. "The math says yes," Elaine replied. "The Stellarite wants to go home. I think it will help us get there." As the day of testing approached, tension grew. They had moved the Phoenix to an abandoned airfield, hiding it under camouflage nets during the day. The night before launch, alarms rang through the nest. "Government forces," someone shouted. "They found us." Olivia ran to the command center. "They have the place surrounded." Someone must have talked. "We need to launch now," Frank said. "The Phoenix is our only chance." They gathered the core team and what supplies they could carry. Using underground tunnels, they reached the airfield just as the sun began to rise. Government vehicles approached in the distance. Agent Clark stood through the sunroof of the lead car, using binoculars to scan the area. "Everyone on board," Olivia ordered. The team rushed up the ramp into the Phoenix. Frank and Elaine went to the engine room where the Stellarite core glowed bright blue. "It knows," Elaine whispered. "It knows we're leaving." In the control room, Susan Baker, their pilot, fired up the conventional engines. "We can outrun them to space, but what then?" "Then we see if our new engine works," Frank said. The Phoenix rose from the ground as government forces arrived. Bullets pinged against the hull, but the ship was already too high. "They're sending fighter jets," Olivia warned, watching the radar. The Phoenix pushed through the atmosphere, leaving Earth behind. The fighters followed but couldn't match their speed. Once in orbit, Susan looked at Frank. "Now or never." Frank nodded and pressed his hand against the Stellarite control panel they had built. The material glowed brighter than ever before, spreading its light throughout the ship. "Activating FTL drive," Elaine said, her voice shaking with excitement and fear. The stars outside the viewports stretched into lines of light, and the Phoenix vanished from Earth's orbit, carrying humanity's first interstellar travelers to the unknown. The Phoenix shot through space at impossible speeds. Inside the ship, the crew held on as stars streaked past the viewports like lines of light. No human had ever traveled so fast before. "We're slowing down," Susan called from the pilot's chair. Her hands gripped the controls tightly. Stellarite drive powering down. The stars came back into focus. A beautiful blue-green planet filled their main screen, orbiting a yellow sun much like Earth's. "Alpha Centauri," Elaine whispered. "We made it." Her voice shook with emotion. "A journey that would take conventional ships years, and we did it in minutes." Olivia checked their systems. "Government ships can't follow us here. We're safe for now." Frank stared at the alien world before them. "Not necessarily," he said, pointing to the radar. "Look." Several objects moved toward them from the planet. They were ships, but unlike any they had seen before. These were smooth and curved, almost alive-looking, with glowing blue lines running across their hulls. "They're hailing us," Kyle said, working the communications panel. "I think they want to talk." A strange voice came through their speakers. It spoke in a language none of them understood, but then switched to broken English. "Unknown vessel. Identify purpose. This sector restricted." Susan looked at Frank, who nodded. "This is the Earth ship Phoenix. We are explorers. We come in peace." There was a long pause before the voice responded. "Earth ships not possess jump technology. You steal. Prepare for boarding. They're locking weapons on us, Olivia warned. The Phoenix shuddered as an energy beam grabbed them, pulling the ship toward the largest alien vessel. There was nothing they could do. Everyone stay calm, Frank said. Let's see what we're dealing with before we panic. The alien ship was massive. It pulled the Phoenix into a docking bay larger than a football stadium. Other smaller ships were stored there, along with mining equipment and containers. When the Phoenix's ramp lowered, they were met by tall, thin beings with gray skin and 4 arms. Each alien carried a staff that hummed with energy. Come, one of them ordered. Its mouth didn't move when it spoke. Instead, a small device on its neck flashed with light. The humans were led through corridors lined with the same blue glowing material as the Stellarite. Frank and Elaine exchanged meaningful glances but said nothing. They entered a large room where a bigger alien sat on a raised platform. This one had markings on its skin that looked like rank or status. I am Overseer Klax of the Vrex Mining Guild, the alien said. You will explain how primitives have obtained jump drive. Frank stepped forward. We found a material on our planet. We call it Stellarite. We learned to use it. The Overseer's eyes widened. Show. Elaine carefully took out a small piece of Stellarite from her pocket. The room went completely silent as the Overseer stared at it. Impossible, Klax finally said. That is waste material. Defective. We discarded it on your world centuries ago. Waste? Frank asked. This waste just helped us cross light years in minutes. The Overseer stood up, towering over them. The material is Coalition property. You will surrender your ship and all research. We found it, Elaine argued. We figured out how to use it when you couldn't. This seemed to anger the Overseer. Humans are primitive species, quarantined for good reason. Coalition decides who joins galactic community. You are not ready. As the argument continued, Frank noticed the Stellarite in Elaine's hand starting to glow brighter. The piece they had installed in the Phoenix's engine was responding too, its energy reaching out to connect with Elaine's piece. Suddenly, the lights in the Vrex ship flickered. The Phoenix's engines started on their own. What's happening? Olivia asked. The Stellarite, Frank said with growing excitement. It's protecting us. The Phoenix's systems came fully online. Its weapons, which they had barely understood, aimed at the Vrex guards. In the confusion, the humans ran back to their ship. As the ramp closed behind them, Frank heard the Overseer shouting orders. Jump drive activating, Susan called out. I'm not doing this. The ship is doing it itself. The Phoenix broke free from the docking bay and shot into space. Before the Vrex could pursue, it vanished in a flash of blue light, taking the humans deeper into the unknown galaxy. The Phoenix traveled from star to star, meeting new alien races. Some were friendly, others were not, but all shared one thing. They had been kept down by the coalition of powerful species that ruled the galaxy. Your ship runs on Stellarite technology, asked Morrow, a leader of the Thalassians. His skin was blue with patterns that glowed when he spoke. The Thalassians lived mostly underwater on their home planet, but could breathe air for short times. Yes, Frank said. We found it on Earth and learned to use it. Morrow's patterns flashed with surprise. The Coalition told us humans were too violent and primitive to join galactic society. They said you would destroy yourselves soon. They wanted us isolated, Elaine realized. They didn't want us to have this technology. The Thalassians had once been a great civilization until the Coalition arrived. Now they were forced to mine their own planet's resources for their oppressors. We were among the first they conquered, Morrow explained. 2,000 years ago. Many have fallen since. Olivia looked at Frank. We need to form an alliance, not just for Earth, but for all these species. Over the next weeks, the Phoenix visited more worlds. They met the Vasi, bird-like beings who built beautiful floating cities. They met the Durrani, who lived for hundreds of years and kept detailed records of Coalition crimes. Each new species joined their growing alliance. The Thalassians helped them understand more about stellarite. It was created by the precursors, Morrow told them one day, a race that believed all species should have equal access to technology. What happened to them? Kyle asked. The Coalition destroyed them and took their technology for themselves. But they never fully understood stellarite because it was designed to be used by many different species working together. Meanwhile, on Earth, word of the Phoenix spread through hidden channels. People spoke in whispers about humans among the stars. The government tried to stop these rumors, but could not. Hope was something they couldn't control. Back on the Phoenix, Elaine made a stunning discovery. She had been studying stellarite day and night, trying to understand how it worked on the deepest level. "Look at this," she told Frank one morning. She placed a small piece of stellarite in a container with several common elements and aimed specific energy waves at it. The stellarite glowed and began to grow, forming new stellarite from the materials. "It can reproduce?" Frank asked, amazed. "Better than that. I can teach it what to become," Elaine said. "It needs the right elements and energy patterns, but then it can copy itself and form new devices." This changed everything. Now they could create more stellarite technology without needing to find more of the original material. They shared this knowledge with their new allies. Soon, ships across many systems began upgrading with stellarite technology. The alliance grew stronger each day. "The Coalition will notice soon," Olivia warned during a meeting with alien leaders. "We need to prepare." "We should return to Earth," Frank suggested. "Bring this knowledge home." After heated debate, they agreed. The Phoenix would lead a small fleet back to Earth to share stellarite technology with humanity. Before they left, Morrow approached Frank. "What your people have done with stellarite in 1 year took others centuries to discover. There is something special about humans. We're just good at making do with what we have," Frank said with a smile. "Taking scraps and making something valuable." The Thalassians' skin patterns rippled with what Frank had learned was laughter. Perhaps that is exactly what the galaxy needs right now. As the fleet prepared to jump to Earth, Frank looked at the stellarite core of the Phoenix. The scrap metal he had found in the ruins had changed everything. Not just for him, but for all humanity. And soon, for the galaxy itself. After a year exploring space, the Phoenix and its fleet of allied ships appeared in Earth's orbit. Frank stood on the bridge looking down at his home planet. It looked so small and blue from up here. "Something's wrong," Susan said, checking the sensors. "There are ships in orbit. Not ours." Olivia zoomed in on the images. Coalition ships. They'd formed a blockade around Earth. Frank's heart sank. They were too late. The Coalition had found Earth and was preparing to attack. Through the viewports, they could see dozens of alien vessels surrounding the planet. "They must have learned we were sharing stellarite technology with our allies," Elaine said. "They want to stop Earth before we become too powerful." A message came through their communication system. It was Agent Clark, now working with the Resistance on Earth. "Phoenix, if you're receiving this, the situation is critical." Clark's voice crackled. "Coalition forces arrived 3 days ago. They're demanding Earth's surrender. They say humans have stolen restricted technology." Frank looked at his crew. "We need to tell everyone the truth. About stellarite, about the Coalition, about everything." "How?" Kyle asked. "Coalition ships are blocking all signals." Elaine smiled. "Not stellarite signals." She had been working on using stellarite to create a new form of communication. "If we use the ship's core to boost a broadcast, we can reach every electronic device on Earth at once." They worked quickly to set up the broadcast. Frank would be the one to speak. He wasn't a natural leader or speaker, but he knew the story better than anyone. He had found that first piece of stellarite in the ruins. "Ready," Elaine said. "Broadcasting in 3, 2, 1. Frank took a deep breath. "People of Earth, my name is Frank Harmon. 1 year ago, I found a piece of metal in the ruins outside Seattle. That metal was alien technology called stellarite. He explained everything. How the Coalition had been keeping humanity isolated, how they had discarded stellarite on Earth thinking it was useless, how humans had learned to use it when the advanced aliens could not. The Coalition is not here to welcome us to the galactic community, Frank continued. They're here because they're afraid of what we might become. They know we can use stellarite in ways they never imagined. Frank sent the manufacturing instructions for basic stellarite devices along with his message. We're sending this knowledge to everyone, not just governments or the wealthy, but to all people. This technology belongs to everyone. As he spoke, resistance groups around the world began receiving the information. People gathered in basements and hidden workshops, working together to build the devices Frank described. The Coalition noticed the broadcast and began their attack. Ships descended toward major cities, firing morning shots that destroyed empty buildings. But something unexpected happened. In thousands of locations across Earth, people had already built simple stellarite shields. When the Coalition fired their weapons, these shields activated, protecting entire neighborhoods. In Australia, a group of farmers used stellarite to enhance old tractors into defense vehicles. In Brazil, university students created communication networks that couldn't be jammed. In Kenya, doctors used stellarite to power hospitals when the Coalition cut off electricity. The Coalition had expected to find a primitive planet ready for conquest. Instead, they found a world of ingenious humans who took the discarded alien technology and turned it into something new. On the Phoenix, Frank watched as reports came in from around the world. Humans were fighting back using stellarite technology in ways even he hadn't imagined. They thought we'd surrender, Olivia said, smiling as she watched Earth's defenders push back the first wave of Coalition forces. They thought wrong, Frank replied. He looked at the small piece of stellarite he still carried, the first piece he had found. They thought it was just scrap. But in the right hands, even scrap can change the universe. 5 years passed since Earth fought off the Coalition attack. The world had changed more in those 5 years than in the previous century. Stellarite technology transformed everything. Cities were rebuilt with stellarite materials that cleaned the air and water. Flying vehicles replaced cars. Food grew in abundance thanks to stellarite-enhanced farming. The environmental damage that had scarred the planet began to heal. Frank walked through the new United Earth headquarters in what was once called Geneva. At 61, his hair was fully gray now, but his eyes remained bright and curious. People nodded respectfully as he passed. Everyone knew who he was, the man who found the first piece. The Durrani delegation has arrived, said a young aide walking beside him. They're waiting in the main chamber. Frank nodded. And the Coalition representatives. They're here too. Not happy, but here. Inside the grand meeting hall, beings from 24 different worlds sat in a circle. Some were old allies like the Philasians. Others were former enemies now seeking peace. The Coalition had splintered after their defeat at Earth, with many species breaking away to join the human-led alliance. Frank took his seat next to Elaine, who now headed Earth's Science Council. She smiled at him, the wrinkles around her eyes showing her age, but not dimming her intelligence. "Ready for this?" she asked quietly. "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied. Olivia, now Earth's chief diplomat, stood to address the gathering. "Today marks the official recognition of Earth as a full member of the new Galactic Congress," she announced. "The old Coalition power structure is dissolved forever." A tall Vrex, not Overseer Clax, but a younger, more progressive leader, spoke next. "We acknowledge that the isolation of Earth was wrong. Humanity has proven itself not just worthy of joining galactic society, but of helping to lead it." Frank remembered how the Vrex had once called stellarite waste material. Now they came to Earth to learn how humans used it. The irony wasn't lost on him. After the ceremony, Frank met with Elaine in her lab. Despite her important position, she still worked hands-on with stellarite research. "I have something to show you," she said, eyes twinkling with excitement. She led him to a secure room where a large stellarate formation pulsed with blue light. "Is that what I think it is?" Frank asked. Elaine nodded. "The dimensional gateway. It works, Frank. We opened it yesterday for just 3 seconds. There are other universes out there, just waiting to be explored." Frank shook his head in wonder. From one piece of scrap metal to multiple dimensions. Not bad for a species the Coalition thought was primitive. Later that day, Frank visited the museum built where he had found the first piece of stellarite. The ruins were gone now, replaced by a beautiful park. Inside the museum stood a glass case containing that original piece, still glowing faintly. A group of children gathered around a tour guide nearby. "And so," the guide was saying, "what one species threw away as garbage, another saw as valuable. Humans didn't have the most advanced technology, but we had something better: creativity and determination." Frank smiled as he listened. The stellarate had changed everything, but it wasn't just the material itself that mattered. It was what humans did with it that made the difference. Outside the museum stood a tall monument made of stellarite. At night, it projected a map of known space into the sky, showing hundreds of worlds now connected by human-designed stellarite ships. The monument base had words carved into it, words that had become famous throughout human space. "From humble beginnings come the greatest journeys. What matters is not what you have, but what you do with it." Frank looked up at the stars, now no longer distant and unreachable, but familiar destinations. Somewhere out there, new human explorers were pushing even further, seeking new worlds and new knowledge. All because a scrap collector had seen value in what others had thrown away.